Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the Space from Home podcast. My name is Daniel Verscharen, and I'm a lecturer in space plasma physics at the University College London's Mullard Space Science Laboratory. In this podcast, I tell you a little bit about the work of space scientists and engineers during the COVID-19 situation. This week's episode is an EGU special. EGU stands for the European Geosciences Union. This organization held its annual General Assembly this week, one of the world's largest conferences in all fields of geoscience, and that includes space physics as well. Before we come to the EGU, I want to give you a brief update about the Solar Orbiter commissioning that I discussed in the last episode. In this last week, the ESA operations staff and the SWA team have successfully commissioned the HISS part of the solar wind analyzer instrument, where HISS stands for the heavy ion sensor. As you can see in this tweet, HISS has measured hydrogen, helium, oxygen, and even multiple charge states of ion. This is really amazing because the measurements of different elements in the solar wind will help us to understand where on the sun the solar wind comes from. Measuring all these different elements is very difficult, and measurements like these have never been done before close to the sun. This is one of the really exciting things about Solar Orbiter. Our SWA instrument will measure heavy ions from a location near the sun. Okay, after this short update, I now come to the EGU, the General Assembly of the European Geosciences Union. The EGU takes place in Vienna every year, typically around the beginning of May. It goes on for 1 week and covers very different fields, such as climate research, volcanoes, hydrology, and much more, but also space physics. Therefore, a lot of us space scientists travel to Vienna every year to discuss science, to learn about the latest developments in our fields, to debate about science policy, and to meet old and new colleagues. Last year, over 16,000 participants attended the conference. This is really a huge number, and it requires a huge conference center. In these big conferences, many sessions run in parallel, where scientists give short talks about their research or they answer questions from their colleagues. In addition, there are thousands of posters about different research projects that are put up for one day, and then you can discuss your work with your colleagues in front of the poster. In this way, scientists can show view graphs and diagrams of their research and discuss with their peers. This year, the organizers actually expected 18,000 attendees to travel to Vienna for the EGU, but then COVID-19 happened and the conference could not take place as planned. So, what happened instead? Well, the organizers of the EGU turned the conference into a large online sharing experiment. Like me, all participants stayed at home, but were invited to upload some slides or view graphs to an online platform. I will add the link to that online platform to the info box below, because all of these displays, as they are called, will still be available until the end of May, and they are publicly available for free. So, if you want to know what's going on at such a conference, check out the website. It's egu2020.eu. After the authors then uploaded their material, other researchers were invited to comment on the research. For example, they could ask questions or add remarks, and during the week of the conference, users could then log in and use a text chat to discuss the research. It's incredible. More than 26,000 users joined these chat discussions and posted over 200,000 messages last week. This is remarkable since there was actually more engagement this year than expected at the actual in-person conference in Vienna. In addition to this online sharing with text chat, some sessions also held online talks with Zoom or other programs. In these sessions, we were able to present our research and to exchange in a lively conversation with other scientists through video conferencing software. We could answer questions and discuss the contributions from others. At these sessions, you usually learn a lot about articles that you better read, or you find out about other researchers that you should really talk to about bringing your research forward. It's very important to find out what the others are doing. Also, these online meetings had over hundreds of attendees and gave a great platform to show your research to others and to discuss it. I've picked just a handful of science displays that I want to show you. Of course, this is just a tiny selection and only based on my own personal taste. One thing that I realized is that there were many great displays about turbulence in the solar wind. Turbulence is a very important topic because turbulence can transport energy to different locations and shuffle energy around and into the particles of the solar wind. These can then be, for example, heated, or they can change their behavior otherwise. Unfortunately, we still don't really understand plasma turbulence that well, and so it's great to see that a lot of displays actually discuss this topic. And I should say, Solar Orbiter will also measure turbulence and help us to understand what's going on with turbulence in the solar wind. Here is one really nice display by Owen Roberts from Graz in Austria. He uses ESA's cluster mission and NASA's MMS mission to study how the fluctuations in the turbulence are actually distributed. The cool thing about these two space missions is that they consist of 4 spacecraft each, so that we get 4 different measure points at each time. That helps us a lot with our understanding of turbulence and how it changes from one location to the next in space. This display of Maria Ryazantseva looks at turbulence near large-scale boundaries in the solar wind. For example, turbulence changes when the solar wind comes near the Earth's magnetic field. And of course, this has an effect on the space environment of the Earth, so we really want to understand how turbulence changes at these transitions. There are also some cool displays about computer simulations of turbulence in the solar wind. Here, for example, Emanuele Papini from Florence shows a new method to analyze computer simulations so that we can compare them better with measurements from spacecraft. Ultimately, this should help us to understand better how the turbulence actually changes with time and in location. This display is from Jefferson Agudelo. He's a PhD student at my own institute. He uses very large supercomputer simulations to replicate solar wind turbulence. In the resulting data from these large computer simulations, he's then searching for signatures of a process that is called magnetic reconnection. And when reconnection happens, the magnetic field changes its structure and energy is transferred to the particles. After finding it in his simulation data, Jefferson can then look for similar structures in spacecraft observations, which hopefully helps us to understand how important reconnection really is in turbulence. There was also a dedicated session at the EGU on the newest results from Solar Orbiter and also from the American Parker Solar Probe mission. Here, for example, you see some first results from the RPW instrument on Solar Orbiter. RPW stands for Radio and Plasma Waves instrument, and Milan Maksimovic from Paris, the principal investigator of the RPW instrument, shows some of the first observations in this display. And lastly, also our SWA instrument was well represented at the EGU this year. Here you see a very nice display from Philippe Louan from Toulouse, and on this slide he shows some of the first results from the proton and alpha sensor, PASS for short, which is one of the 3 sensors in our SWA instrument suite. As you can imagine, there was a lot of interest in these newest measurements from Solar Orbiter. One thing that I realized at this EGU was the large number of additional non-science discussions and short courses. A lot of this material is also still available online, and I will put links to these contents into the info box below. For example, there was a short course about science blogging for beginners. This course would have taken place in Vienna if we had gone there, but it is now a YouTube webinar, still very, very interesting. It includes practical exercises so that at the end of this webinar, you almost have the first draft of a science blog post ready that you can then submit to a blog site. Another really interesting discussion was about practicing open and fair research. FAIR is an acronym, an abbreviation that stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. The participants in this discussion actually spoke about how research data and research results are archived so that everybody can access and use them. This includes, for example, issues with free online access to journal articles or how you can reproduce findings from other research groups. What I found quite interesting is that open access papers, so those articles that everybody can download without paying for it, have actually more citations than papers that are not open access, so it actually makes a difference. One very interesting webinar had the title Mind Your Head, and it included some insights into mental health and well-being, two very important topics. The contributors discussed topics like imposter syndrome, or the importance of physical exercise as a mental activity, the life as a researcher with a chronic illness, and also how to overcome anxiety. It was also very interesting to hear that psychological research finds that over 30% of PhD students develop burnout symptoms during their time as a student. That's a really large number and a big problem. This webinar also discussed the importance of student supervision, which is a special challenge during the COVID-19 crisis, as you can imagine. And I plan to have an episode of this podcast dedicated to supervision from home sometime later. That's a very important part of the life as a space physicist, especially if you work at a university. There were also two so-called great debates about science policy that I would like to highlight. One debate discussed the topic values versus facts. Should geoscience get personal? And the issues discussed here were about how to deal with misinformation and complexity in the communication of science, and about the relation of science to policy making. Two topics that are especially important to climate researchers, I would imagine, but it's also really interesting to follow from a more general science perspective. The other great debate was about cutting carbon in geoscience. For example, many researchers have to go on field trips for their research, where they have to fly to, or, very timely, many researchers travel to conferences and usually take an airplane when they have to go there as well. So the question is, what can we do to reduce the carbon footprint of these activities? And actually, the EGU conference organizers are now thinking about a hybrid format for the future in which some activities can be done in person and other things virtually from home. I personally think that this online format for the EGU worked really well this year. It was amazing to see all these great research displays and to attend the online meetings from home. For big conferences like the EGU or its international counterparts, this format is actually quite good. However, for smaller conferences, in which only tens or maybe 100 researchers participate, this may not work so well. Sometimes it's just better to have a group of people in a room where they can't escape, so to speak, and to keep the discussion going. Also, we shouldn't underestimate the importance of socializing with colleagues and networking with them outside of the scientific sessions, and that works much better in person. Very often you sit with your colleagues after the day at the conference and still chat about new projects and new ideas. So I don't mind attending online conferences like this year's EGU. In fact, it was a great experiment that worked really well in my eyes. Maybe that's one thing that we can learn from the COVID-19 situation, and probably conferences will look quite different in the future. Again, check out the EGU website and the YouTube links in the info box below. All of this material is still there, and you can just check it out. If you like this short look into Space from Home and this EGU special, please like and share this video, and then hopefully I'll see you around next time. Until then, take care and stay safe. Goodbye.